Starting off this countdown, we have Thomas W. Lawson. Thomas W. Lawson was a British stockbroker who in 1907 published a book called Friday the 13th. The story was about a stockbroker who tried to make the entire stock market crash on Friday the 13th, hence the name of the book. Little did he know that he would eerily predict the future. On Friday, December 13th of 1907, a ship named Thomas W. Lawson, named after a completely different Thomas W. Lawson, not the author, set sail on her first transatlantic voyage. That day, she sank. Isn't that bizarre? A ship named Thomas W. Lawson crashed and sunk on Friday the 13th. I'm telling you, this guy predicted the future whether he meant to or not. Moving on to number 9, we have the start and end of America's Civil War. In July of 1861, Wilmer McLean's Virginia home was involved in the first battle of Bull Run. In fact, the general of the battle wrote a diary entry about a cannonball crashing through McLean's kitchen. He wrote, and I quote, "A federal shell fell into the fireplace of my headquarters at the McLean house." Now, due to safety reasons, McLean moved his family home from the front lines to a new home in Appomattox County. Well, guess what? The battle ended up ending in his parlor in 1865. So it started in his backyard and ended in his parlor. So he was involved in the beginning and the end. Moving on to number 8, we have the birth chart. This story was shared by Raina Lee R on Reddit. So according to her, her brother's doctor would always get his chart mixed up at the office. And that's because there was another kid under his care with the same first and last name. To make things weirder, they were both born on the same day, just different months of the same year. And their mothers had the same name. What are the odds of that? I'll be saying that a lot in this video, so get used to it. But for someone to have the same first and last name as you, it's absolutely wild. And the same doctor. I just hope that they met and became best friends. Coming in at number 7, we have the Marks. This story was shared by Pata95 Nishta on Reddit. And this story is about to blow your mind. So according to her, her best friend from elementary school has 3 sisters. All 3 sisters grew up to marry engineers. Not only that, but all of their husbands were named Mark. And her best friend, I guess, followed this tradition because when she got older, she also married an engineer named Mark. What are the odds that all husbands' names were Mark and all of them are engineers? This is wild to me. Like, did the sisters do that on purpose? Are all engineers just named Mark? Also, that must be so confusing at family get-togethers and dinners. In our 6th spot, we have the meteor. So it's said that the odds of being hit by a meteor is 1 in 840 million. So the odds of this happening are very, very, very slim. It's next to impossible. Well, the impossible happened to a family in France. One night they were hit by a meteor which had been flying through space for more than 4.5 billion years without hitting a target. Then all of a sudden it just crashed into their home. Thankfully, no one was hurt. The odd part here is that the family's last name was Comet. So, out of all families and homes to hit, it hit the family with the name Comet. That is truly bizarre. We are now at our 5th and halfway mark with Anthony Hopkins. In the early 1970s, Anthony Hopkins was casted to play Koista in The Girl from Petrovka. This film was based on the book of the same name. Now, to prepare for the role, he was going to read the book. However, he was unable to find any copy of the book in any bookstore. He searched all over the place, but to no avail. Then, randomly one day, as he was sitting in the London tube station, he found a copy of that book just laying around. Not only that, but when he opened the book, he found that it was signed by its author. Literally, the universe brought him what he was looking for. What are the odds of someone leaving that book behind and then Anthony finding it? The very book he was desperately looking for. Coming in at number 4, we have the close calls. In 2014, Dutch cyclist Martin de Jong had plans to head from Amsterdam to Kuala Lumpur. He was scheduled to be on Malaysia Airlines Flight 17. But before his flight, he bumped his ticket up to catch a later flight because it was cheaper. That is the airline that was shot down while flying over eastern Ukraine. All passengers lost their lives. That's not all. In March, he had a flight from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing. Again, he decided to bump his ticket up at the last minute to get a cheaper deal. And it's a good thing that he did. He was scheduled to be on Malaysia Airlines Flight 370, the one that disappeared, never to be seen again. So Martin escaped death twice, all because he wanted a better deal and save some money. He He's a lucky, lucky man, but also unlucky that he was supposed to be on both of those flights. In our third spot, we have the plum pudding. Mathematician Joseph Mazur shared this creepy coincidence involving French poet Émile Deschamps with plum pudding in his book Fluke. So back in the day, a man named Émile was first introduced to plum pudding by a man named Mr. de Forgebus. From that moment on, every time he had plum pudding, he would encounter Mr. de Forgebus, and I hope I'm saying his name right. The second time he had plum pudding, he was at a restaurant and ordered it, but the waiter was like, "Sorry, we just sold the last pudding to this man," and points to the back of the restaurant. Lo and behold, it was Mr. de Forgebus. A decade later, he went to a dinner party, and at the party, they were serving plum pudding. Émile made a joke like, "Who's this party for, Mr. de Forgebus?" And at that very moment, he walked through the door. But he wasn't even supposed to be at that party. He had accidentally come to the wrong door on his way to another dinner party. So what are the odds that every time that this man had plum pudding, Mr. de Forgebus was there? It's kind of like Beetlejuice, you know, you say his name 3 times and he'll appear, except in this case, you have plum pudding and he'll appear. Moving on to number 2, we have Flight 666. Now this one gives me the absolute creeps. On Friday the 13th, Flight 666 departed from Copenhagen and landed in Helsinki, aka H-E-L, hell. Let me say that again for you. Flight 666 flew to hell on Friday the 13th. I don't know about you, but if I was scheduled on that flight, I would cancel immediately. I ain't taking no chances. But thankfully, the flight landed safely in Helsinki. Thank gosh it did, because that seems like one cursed flight. It's plain creepy how it lined up exactly like that. Pun intended. Get it? Plain creepy. And in our number 1 spot today, we have the prediction of James Dean's death. On September 30th, 1955, James Dean died in a car accident. He was only 24 years old. And it seems like a man named Alec Guinness actually predicted this would happen. He warned Dean and said, and I quote, "If you get in that car, you will be found dead in it by this time next week." A week later, Dean was involved in a terrible car accident and he sadly lost his life. In fact, Alec had said that the car was sinister, and I think he's right. Later, parts of the car were recovered and resold and placed into other cars. All the car owners who had parts of James Dean's car were also involved in deadly crashes. Not only that, but the mechanic working on the car died after the car rolled off the back of a truck and crushed the legs of the mechanic. So Alec was onto something here and tried to warn Dean. Starting off this countdown, we have Jean-Marie Dubarry. On February 13th, 1746, a French man named Jean-Marie was executed for the murder of his father. Hundreds of years later, on the exact same day, a man named Jean-Marie Dubarry was also sentenced to death. He had also taken the life of his father. So what are the odds that 2 unrelated people with the same name both killed their fathers and then got executed on the same day? Like, that is just way too freaky. In our 9th spot, we have the dollar bill. Now, this is a pretty wholesome one for you all. When a woman named Esther was young, she had written her name on a couple of dollar bills after a bad breakup. She then told herself that she was going to marry the man that brought the bill back to her. Well, years later, she was dating a man named Paul Gratchen. The day he asked Esther to be his girlfriend, they were at a sandwich shop. As he was paying for the meal, he got handed a dollar bill with the name Esther written on it. The bill she wrote years prior. And in the end, they ended up getting married. Now, how wholesome is that? The universe literally gave her what she had manifested. Coming in at number 8, we have the girls with the red balloon. In 2001, a 10-year-old girl named Laura Buxton decided to release a red balloon from her front yard with a message on it. The balloon said, "Please return to Laura Buxton," and it had her address written on it. Well, this balloon traveled 140 miles and ended up landing on the yard of another 10-year-old girl's house. This girl's name was also Laura Buxton. Like, what are the odds? The 2 Laura Buxtons ended up meeting and they discovered that they had tons of similarities, not just their age and name. For example, they both had a guinea pig, a gray rabbit, and a 3-year-old chocolate lab. They both also looked alike and dressed alike. I'm telling you, this is just way too freaky. Like, what are the odds? I'm gonna be saying that a lot in this video. What are the odds? Moving on to number 7, we have Mark Twain and Halley's Comet. Every 76 years, Halley's Comet is visible to the naked eye as it soars past Earth. Well, American writer Mark Twain was born on one of Halley's Comet's passing in 1835. The next year that the comet was said to pass was in 1910, and Mark Twain predicted that he was going to die that year. He said that he came into the world with the comet and that he was going to leave the world with the comet as well. And Mark Twain was right. Mark Twain passed one day after the comet's closest approach in 1910. So not only did Mark Twain predict his own death, but his birth and death both seamlessly lined up with Halley's Comet. How freaky. In our 6th spot, we have Violet Jessup. Violet Jessup has been named the luckiest woman as well as the unluckiest woman. She also has been given the name Miss Unsinkable, and I'll explain how she got those nicknames in just a second. So Violet was a stewardess and nurse who was on board 3 big sister ships when disaster struck each of them. It started with the HMS Olympic. She was on board the ship when it collided with the HMS Hawk. Then she was on the HMHS Britannic when it struck a mine at sea. And lastly, she was on board the Titanic, and she managed to escape all 3 of these disasters. At this point, she probably was cursed, and after the first accident, she shouldn't have gotten back on any ships ever again. So that's why she's been given the name the luckiest, unluckiest woman to live. She's been lucky to survive all the accidents, but unlucky that they kept happening to her. We're now at our 5th and halfway mark with Daniel du Toit. The irony behind this next story is mind-blowing. So Daniel du Toit was a South African astronomer. Over his life, he discovered and co-discovered several comets. He also spent his days giving lectures. On September 28th, 1981, he gave a lecture on how death can strike anyone at any time. As soon as the lecture was done, he popped a mint into his mouth. The mint then slid to the back of his throat, he choked on it, and died right then and there. So yeah, I'd say his lecture was pretty spot on. In our 4th spot today, we have Harry Zigland. Now, this story is kind of controversial. Some say it's an old wives' tale. Others say that it actually did happen. Now, if it did happen, then this is the definition of karma. So back in the day, there was a man named Harry Zigland who broke a woman's heart. She was so heartbroken that she took her own life. Her brother was so devastated and angry at Harry that he vowed to get revenge on him. So he went out to find Harry with his gun and shot at him. Harry fell to the floor, and the brother, thinking that he had succeeded in killing him, grabbed his gun and took his own life. But Harry survived. The bullet didn't strike him. Instead, it hit and got lodged into a nearby tree. 3 years later, Henry was using dynamite to remove the tree. When he blew it up, the explosion sent the bullet out of the tree, and it hit and instantly killed him. It took karma 3 years, but it finally caught up to him. Coming in at number 3, we have the Hoover Dam. Over the course of the construction of the Hoover Dam, there were 96 deaths. The first death was of a man named J.G. or George Turney. It occurred on December 20th, 1922. He sadly lost his life after drowning in the dam. 14 years later, on the exact anniversary of this guy's death, his son, Patrick Turney, lost his life. He fell from an electrical tower and died. This was also the final death reported during the construction of the dam, meaning the first man to die and the last man were father and son, and it happened on the exact same day. Coming in at number 2, we have Jack Frost and Other Stories. Some things are just meant to be, and you'll believe this once you hear this next story. Children's book author Anne Parrish was with her husband in Paris when they stopped by an antique bookshop from the 1920s. While in there, she found a copy of Jack Frost and Other Stories. She told her husband that that was her favorite book as a child. Well, when he opened the book, it had her name written inside of it. It read Anne Parrish, 209N Weber Street, Colorado Springs. So not only did it have Anne's name in the book, but it had the place she grew up in, Colorado Springs. Seems like Anne was meant to find that book. And in our number 1 spot today, we have the 2 presidents. It turns out that Abraham Lincoln and John F. Kennedy share a lot of eerie coincidences. Besides the fact that they both were American presidents, they both were killed by a gunshot wound to the back of the head. They both passed away on a Friday. They both died before a celebration. Kennedy was assassinated on the eve of Thanksgiving. Lincoln died right before Easter. And each were accompanied by their wife and another couple when they were killed. But that's not all. They both had best friends named Billy Graham, both Billys had 4 children, and they both had secretaries named after the other president. Kennedy's secretary was Miss Lincoln, Lincoln's secretary was John. But wait, there's even more. Both of their successors were vice presidents called Johnson. The freakiest coincidence, Lincoln was shot in Ford's theater. Kennedy was shot in a Lincoln made by Ford. Whoa, boom, mic drop. Isn't that insane? I thought so. It blew my mind.
Kicking off the list at number 10, the Hoover Dam coincidence. We'll kick this list off on a grim note because why not? The Hoover Dam, okay, this massive accomplishment. Its first victim, sadly, was a man named J.G. Tierney. It was December 20th, 1922, and the official death toll from industrial accidents during the construction of the dam from 1921 to 1935 was sadly around the 200 number. It was a lot of deaths. It was pretty sad. The earliest and latest victims of the construction were both father and son. And if that's not coincidence enough, both of them died on the exact same day. They both passed on December 20th. J.G. Tierney sadly drowned while conducting surveys in the Colorado River, and then 13 years later, Patrick Tierney fell off an intake tower right before construction was complete. Grim start, but stay tuned, we have a lot more. Number 9, legendary musical neighbors. It's weird how similar some of your neighbors are, right? Like growing up, we had 3 Davids on our street. They all loved cutting their lawn at 7 a.m. What a coincidence, right? We all hated them. What a coincidence. Well, the 60s rock icon Jimi Hendrix and the 18th century composer George Friedrich Handel, they were both neighbors. A couple hundred years apart, but they were both neighbors indeed. They lived in 23 Brook Street and 25 Brook Street in London. What are the odds, right? Had George been born 200 years later, we would have gotten the greatest collab of all time. Yeah, if you're local, of course you'll know there's a site there now. It's a famous landmark, but in terms of coincidences, there's music in the air on Brook Street. Something's going on. Kind of want to walk by and see if I'm better at playing the flute. Maybe I could play the flute on that block, who knows. Number 8, same taxi, different tragedy. Okay, here's a dark one, buckle up folks, pun intended. Back in 1975, a man was sadly hit by a taxi in Bermuda. Now he of course sadly did not make it, all the while a passenger in the taxi witnessed the entire horrible event. Now that's life-changing in itself, that's trauma, right? A year later though, the same driver was driving the same passenger when all of a sudden, the taxi hits another civilian. That civilian just happened to be the initial victim's brother. Horrible. This is some Final Destination stuff. I don't like it at all. Like this, what are the odds here, really? Let's move on to something a bit nicer, a bit. Number 7, same day, different vows. Okay, brightening up the mood a little bit, bringing us all back to happy land. CBC News reported this one. It's a little nicer of an ending. Fred and Lynette Dubendorf, husband and wife, they were taking a stroll down the beach with their dog, living up the life, right? The classic. When they noticed a message in a bottle had washed up on the shore. Now personally, I wouldn't be too excited, right? I'd be a little concerned. I've seen Castaway, you know? This message could go one of 2 ways. I have no idea. Like what's gonna be in here, right? Like help, 1876, you're like, oh no. But they opened it and inside they found wedding vows from another couple, Melody Kloska and Matt Bears. They had recently got married on a beach in Lake Michigan and word spread rather quickly. Thing is, their wedding date was the same as the couple who found the message. That was the bizarre coincidence here. So they took it as a sign that both pairs were meant to be and they sent a surprising letter to the lost couple's address. It's kind of nice, but it's also kind of creepy, you know? It'd be creepy on one hand. Hey, I found that message in a bottle. Cool, nice address, lovely home. Cool, I'll be back in a bit. Hope it works out. Who puts their address on a message? That's just asking for disaster. Number 6, $1 marriage. The story of Esther and Paul Gratchen. Okay, this one goes out to all the single folks out there, okay? Keep hanging on. Love's coming, it's out there. See, Paul had decided on asking Esther to marry him, and around the same time, he caught himself about to spend a $1 bill on a sandwich. But the dollar bill randomly had the name Esther on it. Okay, so he framed it. Obviously, this was a bizarre coincidence, and Paul recognized this. And when he showed Esther later, she was speechless, right? She loved it, but she didn't tell Paul her side of the story until after they tied the knot. See, much earlier, when Esther and a group of friends were all going through a breakup, they wrote their names on a dollar bill and said, whoever brings this bill back to them, they'll marry that man. Now Esther didn't tell Paul the full story until after they got married because, well, she was worried this coincidence would have scared him away. Yeah, more than fair. Hey, I have a dollar bill and it's your name on it, so we have to get married now. You're like, what? Bye. Number 5, Civil War coincidence. There's another war coincidence in this list, but I saved that for number 1 because it's too good. But this one here is also Pretty insane. The Civil War began in 1861 with the first Battle of Bull Run. The Bull Run is a stream that passes through the farm of a 46-year-old Wilmer McLean. Passes through his farm, right? The Bull Run is a stream that passes through the farm of a 46-year-old Wilmer McLean. This property was in Virginia. Now, of course, once the dust settled, the property was destroyed, so McLean left his home with his wife, and for nearly 4 years, the pair were considered safe while the war was otherwise changing history. Then in 1865, the war came to a close when Robert E. Lee surrendered to Ulysses S. Grant at the Appomattox Courthouse, which at the time was literally steps away from McLean's new property. Yeah, he saw the beginning and the end of the Civil War by accident. He saw it front row too. What are the odds? Number 4, George D. Bryson. Back in the 50s, this story was spread all over Kentucky. Back in the 50s in Louisville, a man named George D. Bryson was checking into a hotel room. Now he walked up and asked if there was any mail for him, which on one hand is an excellent bit. I'm gonna do that next time I go to a hotel for sure. Hey, got any mail? Classic, because you're just visiting the one time. There's no way there's gonna be mail. That's the joke, right? Except this time, there was. This time the hotel manager said yes, and there was in fact mail from the previous occupant of the room, who had also had the same name, George D. Bryson. Yeah, what are the odds, right? I remember one time I met another McWaters, and he was not related to me, and he also was not thrilled that we had the same name at all. It was the most bizarre thing. I was like, hey, can we talk about this? He's like, yeah, cool. I'm like, are you my brother? I don't want you to be anymore. Get out of here. Then I got Kyle, and I was like, you know what? Change your name. Now you're my new brother. Replace this guy. Number 3, Yanni and Laurel. Before we wrap up this curious list, we have to throw a fun recent one in as well. Remember this Yanni Laurel thing back in 2018? I only heard Yanni for like 2 weeks straight. I heard Yanni. That's it. For 2 weeks, guaranteed. I was determined that it was Yanni, okay? And then one day I listened and it was Laurel, and then I couldn't go back. It was just Laurel all of a sudden. Like it immediately just changed. It was a completely different word. I felt sick. I was like, is this real life? How is this happening? This got everybody talking. What is this phenomenon that happens? Same with the dress mishap. What is going on? Well, many believe these viral illusions are proof that we're living in a simulation. Yeah, these arguments, the dress is blue, no it's white, these situations prove that we perceive reality in our own individual way. Everybody is living an individual perceived reality, so sometimes it doesn't always align. Sometimes we hear what we want to hear. Sometimes we hear Yanni, and then sometimes we hear Laurel, and it's completely different for some reason. I can't go back now, it's the worst. God, I hated this so much. The dress was back in 2015, then Yanni Laurel was 2018. I don't know, we're due for another glitch in the matrix any day now. I come back next week, I have a different first name all of a sudden, you're like, what? Number 2, miss unsinkable. It's one thing to narrowly miss a natural disaster or a massive accident, but to not miss a tragedy 3 times in a row, that sounds like a curse if you ask me. That's for sure a curse. Violet Jessup, this brave soul, survived 3 major ship disasters in history. She was born in 1887 in Argentina, and Jessup contracted tuberculosis at a young age and wasn't expected to live longer than a few months. She beat those odds and lived a healthy, relatively long life, which is shocking considering what I'm about to tell you. Violet, first of all, had a hard time getting hired as a stewardess on a ship because her youth and good looks were feared to distract crew and passengers. Yeah, you're too good looking to work on our ship. Welcome to the 1900s, I guess. Eventually, she got hired in 1910 to work aboard the HMS Olympic. Now, a year later, the Olympic collided with HMS Hawk, and the ship barely made it to shore. It was a tragedy. It was a huge disaster. Violet then served as a nurse aboard the Titanic right before World War I. The ship then collided with a German mine, and Violet jumped overboard and somehow survived with a fractured skull in the water and swam to safety. Afterwards, Violet worked on the Titanic, and on April 14th, 1912, she escaped another disaster on lifeboat 16. I mean, like, the odds that you survive 3 times in a row is one thing, but to experience 3 of those in a row? Huh. And finally, number 1, World War I soldiers. We have to finish on a grim note because this one is one of the most bizarre, in my opinion. When the First World War ended, the amount of British lives lost were around 1 million souls. The first reported casualty of World War I was a soldier named John Parr. And then after a countless number of lives were lost, the last soldier to die was a man named George Edwin Ellison. Now, both heroes' resting places are both in the St. Symphorian Military Cemetery, and they just happen to be 15 feet apart. And of course, this was not planned, nor were any of the entries on our list. It's just another bizarre coincidence that was discovered after the fact. Number 10, twins named Jim. Okay, we'll kick this part 2 off on a lighter note. This one gets a little dark, so we'll ease our way in, The twins named Jim. Okay, that sounds like a 2026 comedy hit already. Back in 1979, a set of twins were reunited when they were 39 years old at the time. This was of course a big moment in their lives. For 37 years, they barely knew of each other's existence. Then when they finally met, the long-lost twins had more in common than they could have ever thought. For starters, both had been named Jim. I spoiled that in the fun title earlier. But their adoptive parents both named the lads Jim. That's insane. Jim? Like of all names, really? And both Jims just happened to love math and carpentry. Both also had jobs and security. And both also had ex-wives named Linda. And they both since married a woman named Betty. This isn't like, what? Imagine meeting another you, and he's like, oh yeah, I also love knitting and Autobots. What are the odds? No, that's too eerie. You're an alien clone. Something's afoot here. Get out of here. Not just meeting a long-lost twin at 40. No way. Number 9, Stephen Hawking. Time is relative and fascinating and all that confusing stuff. There's so many components of our universe that we still don't even understand. James Webb is out here making people turn to atheists all of a sudden. The universe is bigger than we all think, yet somehow it still gives us these once-in-a-lifetime coincidences. Or as I say, coincidence. Stephen Hawking's death occurred on Einstein's 139th birthday, which is also Galileo's 300th death day, and also Pi Day. This was March 14th. My dad has the same birthday as Daniel Radcliffe, and they're both wizards, so I don't know. Just saying. These birthday coincidences are getting out of hand. Coincidences. There it is, he's got it. Number 8, atomic survivor. On August 6th and 9th, 1945, the United States detonated 2 nuclear explosives over the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. This, of course, was devastating. The results in this reaction, the blast and the radiation they both caused, took the lives of nearly 90,000 people. It was horrible. But in 2009, the Japanese government confirms that there was at least one man who was in each city on both days of the reactions, and he lived to tell the tale. On August 6th, Satomu Yamaguchi was in Hiroshima on a business trip. As I was walking alone, I heard the sound of a plane. Just one, he told a British newspaper. I looked up into the sky and I saw the B-29 and it dropped 2 parachutes. I was looking up into the sky at them and suddenly it was like a flash of magnesium, a great flash in the sky, and I was blown over just like that. And by August 9th, he had returned home to Nagasaki only to experience the trauma for a second time. Despite the double radiation exposure, Yamaguchi lived to be 93 years old, which is incredible. He sadly passed away from stomach cancer. Number 7, Julianne Kopka. Miss Julianne has a 2-for-1 when it comes to survival stories. I had to include it. Her story starts out on Christmas Eve, a lovely day, 1971, when she was just a teenager and she was on Lanza Flight 508. Now the plane was struck by lightning, which is an actual nightmare situation that I didn't know could happen, and this led to the plane starting to disintegrate midair. It was all bad. In what felt like the blink of an eye for Julianne, she found herself still strapped to her seat 2 miles above the Peruvian rainforest. She was injured, of course, full of bruises, a broken collarbone, but she was alive after she landed. And in fact, she was the only person who had been on the flight that was still alive. Just fell out of a plane and lived to tell. That is crazy. That is bad insane. But it's like you're out of the fire into the frying pan at this point, right? Now you're in the wilderness all alone with no food, just, a little bit of candy, if anything, from the plane. Julianne had found a small stream which she began to wade in downstream. She traveled along it, and the insects in the jungle were eating her alive, and sorry, this next part is gross, but maggots had infected her arm. It was like bad, worse, even worse. Now we're flowing down a river and maggots are eating me. This is incredible. Julianne ended up coming across a sort of encampment where she found a few supplies, and she was so smart and was able to give herself a little bit of first aid, which included pouring gasoline on the infected arm, which then led to all the, disgusting bugs and maggots leaving it. Because they're like, hey, I'm not a fan of gasoline. Lunch is over. See you later. And then just a few hours later, a few lumber workers found her, and they gave her more first aid treatment and took her to an area that was more populated, where she was then airlifted for medical treatment. Now, in 2000, her story was told through the documentary titled Wings of Hope, which was directed by Werner Herzog, who particularly took interest in the story because, one, it's obviously incredible. As I was just explaining it, I read this and I'm like, it's crazy. But 2, Werner Herzog also had a seat booked on that flight, and he would have been on that same flight if it wasn't for a last-minute change of plans. I can't even, that should be number 1, really. Number 6, Comet family. Okay, this one's good. The odds of being hit or killed by a meteor are 1 in 2 million, or something like that, right? It's crazy. But even so, back in 1954, residents in Talladega County, Alabama, noticed a ball of fire heading towards the Earth. Now, back then we didn't have Twitter, right? We couldn't warn anybody that a meteor was possibly gonna hit us. We also really didn't know if it was gonna hit or not, or how big it was, so it was alarming. Especially for Anne Elizabeth Hodges, who got hit by by said space rock. Yeah, she only got grays, but with these odds, it's still possible. Wild. Now cut to recent history, the Comet family in France. Their house was hit by a meteor. I'll say that again. The Comet family was hit by a... You get it, there we go. As somebody with the last name McWaters, I'm a little worried that I might drown now. I don't know. Last names seem to be a little bit of a tip-off, it seems. And number 5, World Cup. An episode from The Simpsons back in 1997 called The Cartridge Family shows Mexico and Portugal going head-to-head in football. Like soccer football, not like, football. You get it. Springfield residents are told to go see this match to determine which nation is the greatest on Earth, Mexico or Portugal. So when the 2018 World Cup then rolled around much later, pun intended, fans were excited that this was now coming true, but at the same time had a laugh determining that Ronaldo must have missed that penalty intentionally so that the prediction would come true. That's like the theory now, that Ronaldo missed to make The Simpsons correct. A lot of theories for that one, it's always fun. But recently it's been announced that Qatar will host the tournament in November and December 2022 rather than usual June-July dates. Another World Cup, another chance for The Simpsons to add another prediction to their already impressive list. That's a creepy show. I have another Simpsons one coming up, but we'll see. Number 4, Mars life. We're back. There it is. There's the next Simpson one. That fast. There we go. Let me ask you lovely people a question. If you could go to Mars right now with like 3 of your friends, would you do it? Keep in mind it's really boring, and unless you're an astronaut botanist like Matt Damon, you'll probably have a rough go. But in the future, would you do it? I would. I'd go. I'd go with like one person, Force too many, that's too much. Going to Mars might be as simple as going to the mall. Apparently, The Simpsons have an episode where they show a family visit to the big red planet come 2051. But honestly, I feel like we're gonna get there a lot sooner. SpaceX is already planning to send people out there. It's a quick, 9-month trip, so make sure your phone's charged. But it's actually more beneficial for the team to travel during these peak times in the 2030s and in the 2050s. Because during these years, trips to the planet will be shorter and they'll coincide with periods of the solar maximum. So while this one may or may not come true in 2022, well, let me tell you, it's right around the corner. Or maybe in 2050. Who knows? Number 3, Titanic inspection card. This inspection card once belonged to a woman named Marion Meanwell. And you're probably thinking, what could possibly be worrisome or, creepy about an inspection card? Well, it shows how Marion was not intended to be on the Titanic that fateful day, but by some turn of events, she unfortunately found herself as one of the passengers. The card shows that she was originally meant to be traveling on a ship called the Majestic, and for some reason, the trip she originally had planned was delayed, and now she instead was assigned to the ill-fated Titanic. The eerie part is you can see the word Majestic was crossed out on her card, which then shows us the change in plans. If only people were able to see what was about to strike and they could have somehow warned her. That's the creepy thing about these coincidences. Sometimes they're just bad, You could fall out of a plane and have maggots all over you and survive, or you could go from one cursed ship to another. Number 2, Edgar Allan Poe. Okay, this is a story that actually convinced me that Edgar Allan Poe is for real a time traveler, so buckle up, grab a soda. Because 2 separate stories that he wrote both turned out to be exceptionally true and real, but not until after they'd been written. Yeah, it's a good one. Firstly, Poe's only completed novel was published in 1838, and it tells the tale of mutiny on a whaling ship lost at sea. These men on a ship realize that they're doomed and need to resort to extreme measures in order to stay alive. So they begin drawing straws to see who they're going to sacrifice to save food. A boy named Richard Parker drew the shortest straw and therefore became the next meal. Dark, let's move on. Let's fast forward to 46 years now to 1884, and in real life also, I might add. There are now 4 men who have been set adrift after the sinking of a yacht. These men found themselves in a similar predicament to the novels, and I kid you not, they ended up taking the same route and elected to sacrifice a cabin boy. A cabin boy also named Richard Parker. Odd, right? Okay. Cut to 1840, Poe penned the gruesome story The Businessman, in which the narrator suffers a traumatic head injury in his youth, and then later a violent life follows. The weird thing about this story is that Edgar Allan Poe fully understood, or so it seemed, frontal lobe injury. Now this was long before it was ever even studied or looked at, right? This type of study didn't arrive until 1848. An actual neurologist, Eric Altschuler, recently wrote how there's a dozen symptoms and he knew every single one. It's so exact and it's so weird, it's like he had a time machine. End quote. Yeah, it's almost like he had a time machine. Did he? And finally, number 1, Simpsons dome in real life. Yeah, this one's gonna hit home. Let's do it. This one's gonna hit dome. That didn't work. For this one, we're looking at the Simpsons movie, which still holds up. That's a fun time. But even over the pandemic, I saw personal domes come to life, right? It was so weird. Restaurants were making these like weird tents on sidewalks just to stay in business. But an even bigger idea came long before this. Back in the 70s, there were talks about putting a dome over Manhattan, this massive dome over Midtown that regulates weather and pollution, all that good stuff. Now, if that had been built, imagine what we would have done with it during the initial breakout during this pandemic. It would have been madness. And then in 2010, later on, the city called Eco City 2020 was planned out. It was supposed to be built in Siberia. It was announced in 2014 officially, this climate controlled, domed city, 4.5 square kilometers, all that good stuff. But since 2016, the project lost the funding. What do you guys think? Should we bring back domes and just, have a little personal bubble everywhere we go? Just lose the umbrella and live in a big glass ball forever over our city? I'd do it. That'd be kind of nice. Be like living in a Coca-Cola mist zone your entire life. Just kind of like, ooh, this is nice.
Number 10, JFK and Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln and JFK have some uncanny similarities, and it freaks me out. They were both elected to Congress 100 years apart in 1846 and 1946 respectively. They both became president 14 years later in 1860, 1960, and both died by a fatal gunshot wound to the head and were succeeded by a man named Johnson, who, wouldn't you know, just so happened to be born 100 years apart. Add to that some other coincidences like them dying on a Friday, their family names containing 7 letters, and the fact that they were both famous for their civil rights efforts, and you've got 2 presidents cut from an eerily similar cloth. So what does this mean? I don't know, but it sure is freaky. Number 9, the Jim twins. When 2 twin boys were put up for adoption in 1940 at only 3 weeks old, their adoptive parents coincidentally named them both James. Both men came to be named Jim for short, and that was just the start of it. The 2 would grow up only 40 miles apart from each other and live similar lives. They grew up without any contact with one another, and when they finally did meet at the age of 39, the similarities between their lives were scary. Both had beloved childhood dogs named Toy, and as school children both had a proclivity for math and woodworking, but weren't great at spelling. As adults, they both were married twice, first to a woman named Linda, then to a woman named Betty. Now when they had sons, they both named them James Allen. They were both smokers, drove Chevys, and even chose to vacation at the same Florida beach. Now on February 9th, 1979, the Jim twins were finally reunited. When their fascinating case came to light, scientists saw how very valuable they could be to the study of reunited twins. They took part in a study conducted by Dr. Thomas Bocard of the University of Minnesota, who found that their medical histories and brainwave tests were almost identical. So too were the results in personality tests. How strange is that? Sounds to me that they were programmed the exact same way. Number 8, double slit experiment. In physics' famous double slit experiments, electrons are fired at a photosensitive screen through slits in a copper plate, usually producing an interference pattern that indicates wave-like behavior. Now this type of experiment was first performed by Thomas Young in 1801 as a demonstration of the wave behavior of visible light. Now at the time, it was thought that the light consisted of either waves or particles, but with the beginning of modern physics about 100 years later, it was realized that light could in fact show behavior characteristics of both waves and particles. Some have taken this to mean our simulation is conserving its resources and rendering certain things only when it knows we're looking at them. So does this mean anything? I'm not sure, but it is something to consider. Number 7, Mandela effect. The Mandela effect is an observed phenomenon in which a large segment of the population misremembers a significant event or shares a memory of an event that did not actually occur. Fiona Broom, a paranormal researcher, coined the term to describe collective false memory when she discovered that a significant number of people at a conference she was attending in 2010 shared a memory that Nelson Mandela had died in prison during the 1980s. In fact, the former president of South Africa was released from prison in 1990 and was very much alive at the time of the conference. Now this has caused an uproar on the internet with people discussing their experiences. For example, some people remember Mr. Monopoly wearing a monocle when he wasn't, Kit Kat with a dash in the middle, the Berenstain Bears or the Berenstein Bears, whichever you believe, and plenty more. Now, is this an accidental glitch in what we're remembering? Was it done on purpose? I don't think we'll ever know. Number 6. The Goldilocks Zone. In astronomy and astrobiology, the circumstellar habitable zone, CHZ, or simply the habitable zone, is the range of orbits around a star within which a planetary surface can support liquid water given sufficient atmospheric pressure. The habitable zone is also called the Goldilocks Zone, a metaphor allusion to the children's fairy tale of the Goldilocks and the Three Bears, in which a little girl chooses from sets of 3 items, ignoring the ones that are too extreme, too large or small, or too hot or cold, and settling on the one in the middle, which is just right. Earth exists in what astrobiologists call a Goldilocks zone, close enough to a star that greenhouse gases can trap heat to keep liquid water, but far enough that the planet does not become a hothouse. People believe that us living in such an orbital sweet spot is circumstantial evidence for a simulation. And let me say, if we were in a simulation, this would be the perfect place to keep us humans. Number 5. Glitches in the Matrix. So with all computers, there can be technical difficulties, including glitches. Now, many people believe there are real-life glitches, proving we're in a simulation. These glitches are events that seem comparable to the effects of errors in computer programs or their execution. Some examples of these include objects vanishing and sometimes reappearing, people being seen by different witnesses at different locations at the same time, or not being seen in places where they should be, aka people vanishing, often for a considerable amount of times, often with multiple searches, then reappearing and claiming that they have never left the spot. Also, changes in everyday familiar objects and time slips and time freezes, where people interact with different time periods, or where they observe all movement and noises cease over a relatively short or larger area. Now, some glitches have been caught on camera, and one very popular glitch that has been documented lately is girls finding a nail that has broken off, matching their same nail color / design in their room, but they are not missing any nails. So where did the broken nail come from? No one knows, but it freaks me out. Number 4. Doppelgangers. A doppelganger is a biologically unrelated lookalike or a double of a living person. As you might have heard, there are 7 other versions of you in this world. Now, a study of lookalikes, unrelated people with faces so similar they could pass for identical twins, has found that such pairs share genetic traits. Scientists study 32 pairs of individuals with uncanny similar headshots who are a part of a long-running project by a Canadian photographer to document these faux twins. The 16 pairs found by computer analysts who have the most similar features also share more genetic variants than the less similar pairs, the researchers concluded. Now, that's not a huge surprise because researchers are already using genetics to predict face shape. The twins do not share DNA methylation patterns, chemical marks controlling gene expression that are shaped by our environment, reinforcing the dominant role DNA alone plays in determining our appearance. Number 3. Stephen Hawking's death. Now, Stephen Hawking is regarded as one of the most brilliant theoretical physicists in history. His work on the origins of the structure of the universe, from the Big Bang to black holes, revolutionized the field. Now, Stephen was seen by many as the world's smartest person, though he never revealed his IQ score. Now, as Stephen himself would tell you, time is relative, but that doesn't quite explain why his death occurred on what many consider a fairly significant day. It happened on Albert Einstein's 139th birthday, Galileo's 300th death day, and Pi Day, March 14th, where the date reads 314. Coincidence? I think not. Number 2. Philosophers. Now, throughout history, some of the world's most notable thinkers have laid out their own questions and ideas about why reality may not be exactly what it seems. According to Built-In, a significant number of people regard the simulation hypotheses as a modern offshoot of Plato's The Republic, or more specifically, the well-known allegory of the cave. In a nutshell, the scholar's allegory features cave prisoners drawing conclusions about reality from the shadows of puppets they can't actually see. Basically, a prisoner who sees the shadow cast by a book may think and draw assumptions from that shadow about what a book really is, but can only learn the truth if he breaks free and sees the actual book with his own eyes. He isn't the only philosopher though, as another example is from 1641, when philosopher René Descartes presented the idea of an evil demon powerful enough to create an illusion that looks and feels like reality. So if these people thought this, and they have advanced technologies like computers, is it just a coincidence, or is it more? And coming in at number 1 is Violet Jessup, aka Miss Unsinkable. Violet Jessup has some horrible luck, or great luck, however you want to look at it. In 1911, she began working as a stewardess for the White Star liner RMS Olympic. Violet was on board September 20th, 1911, when Olympic left from Southampton and collided with the British warship HMS Hawke. Now, despite the damage, the ship was able to make it back to port without sinking. She continued to work on the Olympic until April 1912, when she was transferred to the sister ship Titanic. Violet boarded the RMS Titanic as a stewardess on April 10th, 1912 at age 24. 4 days later, on April 14th, it struck an iceberg in the North Atlantic and sank about 2 hours and 40 minutes after the collision. She was later ordered into Lifeboat 16, and as the boat was being lowered, one of Titanic's officers gave her a baby to look after. The next morning, Violet and the rest of the survivors were rescued by the RMS Carpathia and taken to New York City on April 18th. Then, in the First World War, Violet was a stewardess for the British Red Cross, and on the morning of November 21st, 1916, she was aboard HMHS Britannic, the younger sister ship of Olympic and Titanic that had been converted into a hospital ship when it sank in the Aegean Sea after an unexplained explosion. Britannic sank within 55 minutes, ending the lives of 30 of the 1,066 people on board. British authorities hypothesized that the ship had either been struck by a torpedo or got hit by a mine planted by German forces. Now, it's incredible that she survived all 3 incidents without getting injured, and she ended up dying at 83 of congestive heart failure in 1971. It had nothing to do with boats.
Starting things off at number 10, we have The Purge. I think the more footage I see from Ring doorbells, my fear of the dark has only intensified. Those things never seem to catch anything nice. There's a Reddit user who further made me want to never leave my house in the dark. The user that goes by the fabulous username of Fat and Depressed shared that between the hours of 12 AM and 4 AM, he got 4 notifications on his phone that his doorbell had detected a visitor. Immediately upon seeing those, I would absolutely be unsettled. When he checked the doorbell's camera the first 3 times, there was nothing. He went on to say that he was thinking it was some sort of stray dog or cat or animal of some kind setting off the motion sensor. That was until the 4th notification came along. This time when he checked the camera, a face showed up on the screen. He also posted a photo of said face, and oh man, not what you want looking back at you at 4 AM. It looked like a guy in his 50s with a face that appeared to be painted white. It could have just been the night lighting on the camera, but his face was white. He also looked like he was wearing black eyeliner all the way around his eyes, and he was standing with his hands behind his back. It seriously looked like a scene from The Purge. Number 9, clowns. Remember the creepy clown epidemic in like 2014 that had people dressing like clowns and making us all scared to leave our houses? Well, you can imagine the chilling security footage that came with that phase. One video in particular comes from none other than Jacksonville, Florida, and whether it was a prank or not, I don't like the video regardless. The footage comes from a home security camera, and it shows the porch of a house with an extremely creepy looking clown standing there looking at the camera. The clown is dressed in an all-white clown jumpsuit, white face, and some clown makeup not suitable for a children's birthday party. For most of the video, the clown just stands there staring at the camera, only moving slightly to tilt his head further to the side. Then the clown decided to take the poor homeowner's pumpkin and start punching it quite aggressively, I have to say. I'm sure when they woke up and saw that video, they wished they never had. Without the security camera, they would have just noticed their pumpkin smashed, but no, thanks to technology, they got to watch a creepy clown stare into their eyes while doing it. I think if I saw this video on my porch, I would be moving out right away. Number 8, where's the exit? User Dr. Beso on Reddit shared a story that just might send a shiver up your spine. He said that he worked as a doctor in a UK hospital, and on a particularly quiet night shift, the nurses told him a story of another doctor at the hospital. The story went that the doctor was running to a crash call when a woman stopped him to ask which way the front entrance was. The doctor directed the woman and kept hustling to the patient. When he got there, he said it was the woman who had stopped him to ask for directions. The woman ended up not making it in the end, but they just had to check the security footage. The whole encounter was caught on the cameras, except the story told on the footage has a slight difference to the one the doctor shared. The camera showed him running, stop midway down the hall, and gesture to the exit while saying something. The only problem was there was no woman on the video. I don't even know how you could explain that one. I hope they gave that doctor doctor a nice long weekend after that. At number 7, stolen phone. This person shared a story that started as a stolen phone and ended in a creepy mystery. He said that they had to call the cops while his girlfriend's cell phone was stolen off the porch of their apartment. He explained that the apartment is a room sectioned off on the first floor of an old mansion with a fenced-in porch. When the officer arrived, he asked to see the surveillance tapes, and the maintenance man let them come along to help the cops with the timestamps to narrow down the footage. Unfortunately, they did not see the person who took his girlfriend's phone. That being said, right about the time they expected to see someone grab the phone, they did see a man. Apparently it was not a resident, as there are only 4 and they all know each other in the building. The man appeared to be running frantically from something, and at full force he entered the only door of the building and never left. Even after over 24 hours of footage. I would have simply left all my belongings behind and found a new apartment after that. Number 6, out of thin air. Edgy shared on Reddit that he was one of the people going through footage from security cameras outside of Pulse nightclub before, during, and after the horrible tragedy that happened there in 2016. While I'm sure all of the footage was quite disturbing, he also claimed to have found something a little supernatural. He said there were so many sad and disturbing things to be seen. The strange one, however, was a wounded man that appeared out of nowhere. Apparently the mystery man waved his hands for help and cops came over to carry him to safety. Etchy shared that he tried numerous times to rewind and find where the man came from, but he was either just there or he wasn't. He didn't crawl to where he ended up, he just appeared. I bet anything that he was sitting with that footage for ages, going back and forth, frame by frame, slowly driving himself crazy. I don't know how he ever stopped rewatching it. I think I would have just become consumed by the mystery of it all. At number 5, frozen footage. Reddit user Trudenter shared a spooky work story that would make it even harder to get out of bed and head to work. He said that he worked at a place that required people to be there 24 hours a day. He was working the night shift and said the security on the building was pretty good. Bars on the window, multiple locked doors, the usual, no one can get in without authorization setup. He said he was finishing up his shift when he heard a door close. After checking the cameras, he saw a person walking towards the room he was in. Thinking it was someone early for their shift, he waited, but when no one entered the room, the hairs on his neck started to rise. He said it not being a huge building, he would go and find the person from the tape. He came up empty-handed, but noticed a fire door had shut. Trudenter said he went to look back at the footage, but didn't have the password. He then said he sat with his spine tingling until the morning shift came in. He told his coworker what had happened, and he went home. When he asked them what they found on the footage, they said it showed the fire door closing, but then the video froze for about an hour. The next thing the camera caught was him reopening the door. Talk about shivers, I would never work the night shift alone again. At number 4, injured intruder. Just Stoic on Reddit shared the story of how she had no idea there was an intruder trying to break into her house until seeing the footage her home's camera caught of it happening. She said that she was living with her godparents at the time. Her godfather had returned from work at about 6 p.m. and asked why there was blood near the pool in the backyard. Just Stoic said she'd been in the room right next to the pool the whole time, so she had no idea what her godfather was on about. They both pulled up the security footage from the day, and sure enough, they figured out the answers. The footage showed a man jumping the fence in broad daylight, cutting himself on their barbed wire above the fence, and frantically looking for a way into the house through the back. The user said she had been maybe 10 feet from the intruder at one point and did not hear a thing. Scary to think what could have happened if a window had been left open. Dang, not even safe from people trying to break in with barbed wire around your house. Number 3, bike be gone. One Reddit user shared his scary security footage story, and it's definitely a head scratcher. The user explained he used to have an apartment near his office building, which was kinda secluded from the rest of the city's commercial district. Anyway, he said that he sold his apartment, and before moving he left his bike chained to the building's bike rack. He figured the bike would be okay in what he called the no man's land for a few days. Then in the middle of the week one day, he came to the office and noticed that the bike rack was completely empty. Since his office was close, he asked the IT guy to watch the security footage in order to catch the bike thief in action. The Reddit user said as he and the IT guy watched, they saw people leaving the office the night before, bike is still there, they kept watching, and all of a sudden the bike was gone. He said we slowed the tape down and literally it was bike there and then poof, gone. The user then went on to say he assumed his bike got taken to the upside down. If that happened to me, I don't think I would ever sleep again knowing my bike just vanished into thin air. Number 2, school prank or another poltergeist. There is a secondary school in Cork, Ireland called Deer Park Christian Brothers School. In October 2017, they released footage from a school security camera that caught some sort of ghost causing a ruckus in the hallway. The video shows a door being slammed open, lockers shaking, locker doors opening, and even the wet floor sign gets thrown around. The video was a viral hit, earning coverage from a wide variety of outlets, with the school's deputy principal telling them he had no idea how things were moving in the video. Wolf said, "We couldn't understand how this had occurred. If it's a prank, it's very well done. After watching the video myself, I'm not even sure how a person could have pulled off the video either." To point even more fingers to it being a ghost, the school is built on a site known as Green Gallows, where in the 19th century criminals would go to be punished. And in the 19th century, they weren't just throwing them in cells. Was it a tech-savvy student pulling a prank, or the angry spirit of a criminal? And at number 1, ominous elevator ride. You may already know the story of the Cecil Hotel and Elisa Lam. You may have already seen the scary footage of her right before her passing, and it's unsettling. Basically, guests at the hotel in Los Angeles complained of low water pressure in their rooms. This caused employees to head up to the roof and check out the water tank. Instead of finding faulty wiring or a broken pipe, they found the body of poor Elisa Lam. She was a young woman traveling on her own. Police were obviously called to investigate, and what they found on the security tape is creepy. The footage she appeared in before the incident was from an elevator, and something was just not right about it all. In it, Lam seemingly speaks to someone, presses all the buttons, and peeks her head out almost as though looking for a person she was scared of. The video has been dissected by law enforcement and conspiracy theorists, but we still have no idea what really happened to Lam. The footage is really ominous, and it only added more confusion as to how she ended up in that water tank.
In our number 10 spot today, we have the man who survived 2 atomic. If you went to history class in high school, then you probably will remember hearing about the 2 atomic that the US dropped on the 2 Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945. 90,000 people were killed due to the blasts and the radiation. But in 2009, the Japanese government confirmed that a man was in both of these cities during their, and he survived both of them. Come again? Yes, a man named Tajumu Yamaguchi was on a business trip in Hiroshima on August 6th when he looked up at the sky and saw the B-29, and it dropped 2 parachutes. Before he knew it, he saw a great flash in the sky, and he was blasted by the impact. By August 9, he was back home in Nagasaki recovering from the incident, only to endure it again. Even though you would probably think that he might not have lived long due to the radiation exposure, he actually lived to 93 and passed away in 2010. That's an insane story that makes you think out of 90,000 deaths this man survived, he must have had a higher purpose. Coming up in our 9th spot today is more of a historical pop culture moment that scientists just wouldn't be able to explain. The discovery of the twins named Jim, a personal favorite of mine. You may or may not have heard of this story before, but personally I think it's fascinating. In 1979, a set of twins that were separated at birth reunited at the age of 39. When they met up, they discovered some pretty crazy coincidences. Both of the boys had adoptive parents that named them Jim. Both of the boys loved math and carpentry, and both pursued a career in security. But the coincidences don't end here. Here's where you start thinking, there must be something else going on that we don't understand. Are you ready? Both boys married women named Linda. Both boys then divorced their Lindas, and both remarried women named Betty. What? Shivers. But it doesn't end here. They both had children and named them James Allen. Mind blown. Like total shivers right now. In our 8th spot today, we have the ship survivor. Imagine being on the Titanic and surviving that horrific accident. Then imagine being in another ship that ended up sinking and surviving that, and then being in a ship collision after that. That's definitely enough to make me never board another ship again, and perhaps also have PTSD whenever I see water. That was the case for Violet Jessup, who was a stewardess aboard the RMS Titanic in 1912. She managed to aboard a lifeboat after being handed a baby to look after. Years later, she was aboard its sister ship, HMHS Britannic, in 1916 when it had sunk. She actually almost died in this sinking drowning as she was on a lifeboat that got sucked under by the propellers, but she jumped out in time. She was also aboard the RMBS Olympic in 1911 when it collided with the British warship. So to say that she lived quite the life would be an understatement. She actually died of old age in 1971. In our 7th spot today, we have the arguably fateful death of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. I say arguably because, well, just you wait and you decide. Yet another story that I hope you learned in history class, the assassination of Franz Ferdinand and the beginning of World War II. You may have learned that he died after an attack on his car, but you may not know that the bomb that was meant for his car actually hit the car behind him and the attempt failed, and Ferdinand was able to get away unscathed. The assassins, we can imagine, were probably feeling hangry, due, of course, to this failed attempt and most likely hunger, as they then decided to stop at a nearby cafe for a sandwich. The Archduke, probably thankful to be alive, dashed off and continued on to safety when his driver took a wrong turn and ended up in front of the sandwich shop. The assassin saw him, shot him and his wife, and thus began the whirlwind of World War II. Makes you think that perhaps he was fated to die, or maybe he was just having a really bad luck day. I would love to know your thoughts in the comment section below. In our 6th spot today, we have the deaths of Thomas Jefferson and John Adams. In 1775, Thomas Jefferson and John Adams became good friends fast. They worked together to draft the Declaration of Independence, and they also spent time together as diplomats for the US in Europe. They had a falling out in 1801 when Jefferson became president over Adams, and they didn't reconcile until 1812. On July 4th, 1826 though, the day that America declared its independence 50 years prior, Thomas Jefferson passed away. But what's interesting is that John Adams, in another state, was on his deathbed, only to say the words, "Thomas Jefferson survives," and then he passed away. Does this mean he saw Jefferson's ghost greet him on his deathbed? They both ended up passing on the same date, and not only that, but on the date that was seemingly their historical purpose. Coincidence? I think not. In our 5th spot today, we have the saving of Robert Todd Lincoln. You may or may not know this, but Robert Todd Lincoln is famously known as the son of the former US President Abraham Lincoln. In late 1864, Robert was traveling from New York to Washington when he found himself leaning against a stopped train. When the train started moving, he fell onto the tracks, only to be saved by an actor named Edwin Booth. When he later realized that his savior was the famous actor Edwin Booth, he made sure to thank him. It wasn't until much later did Edwin learn the identity of the man he saved, as he was the son of the president whom was shot by Edwin's brother, John Wilkes Booth. That's too weird of a coincidence for me. I guess perhaps if Lincoln's son had died, maybe Lincoln himself wouldn't have been where he was on that fateful day that he passed. In our 4th spot today, we have another weird coincidence revolving around Robert Lincoln. The death of not one, not two, but 3 American presidents occurred right in front of him. Highly sus, Robert. The first was, of course, his own father's assassination, President Abraham Lincoln. After his death, Robert and his mother moved to Chicago, where he planted roots, got married, had children, and created his law practice. He continued to work in politics as the Secretary of War under the presidency of President James A. Garfield in 1881. But while at a railroad station in Washington with Robert and a few others, Garfield was assassinated. Then in 1901, Robert was invited to attend a Pan-American exposition in Buffalo by President William McKinley, only to witness his assassination. Apparently, Robert has been quoted as saying that there was a certain fatality about the presidential function when I am present. Is there, Robert? Or did you perhaps concoct the death of your father with your savior Edwin Booth and his brother John, and then perhaps all these other incidences after? In our 3rd spot today, we have the comet family. It is said that your odds of being killed by a comet is 1 in 1,600,000, so not very high. You're more likely to be hit by lightning, and even that is 1 in 500,000. And so of course, on top of these odds, no one would expect that a comet would hit the home of a French family named, can you guess? Comet, or comet. I love the French. Comet. What are the odds? Probably in the trillions. Thankfully, nobody in the family was hurt, and they now have their very own space rock as a souvenir. Life is so funny and weird. In our number 2 spot, we have the Civil War house. In 1861, when the Civil War broke out with the First Battle of Bull Run, it at some point made its way through the garden of Wilmer McLean in Virginia. After the mass devastation, Wilmer decided to leave his home and he moved to a new place, Appomattox, Virginia. But of course, the war followed him there and actually came to a close when Robert E. Lee surrendered to Ulysses S. Grant at the Appomattox Courthouse, just only steps away from McLean's new property. Poor guy, he just wanted to live a peaceful, war-free life. Is that too much to ask for? Or perhaps he's psychic and he knew that peace would happen in this particular town. Who knows, but interesting coincidence. Finally, in our number 1 spot today, we have the very interesting birth and death of Mark Twain. Mark Twain was born on November 30th, 1835 in Florida, Missouri, the day that a very special comet was in the sky, Halley's Comet. The Halley's Comet returns to the Earth's vicinity approximately 75 years, give or take a bit, due to the gravitational pull of the planets that it passes. About 74 years later, Mark Twain made a prediction that his death would coincide with the comet's next appearance, just like his birth. He was known to have said that "It will be the greatest disappointment of my life if I don't go out with Halley's Comet. The Almighty has said, no doubt. Now here are 2 unaccountable freaks. They came in together, they must go out together." And he was right. He ended up dying April 21st, 1910, the day after Halley's Comet made its return. It was also a very special day as it was the first time the comet was captured on camera. Pretty awesome if I do say so myself.